Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where I am going to be sharing my top 10 games for every system that I've owned over the years. The Sega Master System was the first console that I got that was mine, all mine. So I had the Master System and my brother had the NES. Talk about spoiled. As with a lot of people back in these days, we didn't have a huge library of games, but I do think with the Master System we had some really great games, and thankfully a lot of my friends also had the Master System, so we could swap games quite often and I got to try a fair few out. And yeah, of course, I'm not saying that these are the best games on the systems, these are just the ones that I played the hell out of back in the day, and the ones that I would always gravitate towards when going back to the system. Now, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. First up is Asterix, made by Sega. I remember getting this game while I was on holiday with my parents and having to wait almost a week to get home and actually play it. Thanks to that, I actually have some of the manual burned into my brain where I just read it over and over. And thankfully, the game did not disappoint. It's an action platform game where you can play as both Asterix and Obelix on their constant crusade to defend their village from those pesky Romans. Here they've managed to kidnap Getafix, who is the local druid, and whose name has literally just made sense as I was reading that. He makes potions and drugs, and he's called Getafix. Genius. Anyway, Asterix and Obelix set out to rescue him, and this takes you through a few really great looking levels with Romans to punch in the face, platforms to jump on, blocks to break, and even some simple puzzles to solve. Levels are just a case of going from left to right until you get to the end, but what's cool is that between each level you get to choose if you want to play as either Asterix or Obelix, and they each have different levels, giving you a reason to go back and replay the game a few times, so you can see them all. The characters do play quite differently, their move speed and jumps are kind of similar, but Obelix is much stronger and can smash blocks with just his fists, and he does a butt stomp that can go through loads of blocks in one go. Asterix is a bit more nimble and is smaller, but he's also a bit weaker, and his levels rely more on some magic potions that you find that you can throw to help you. For example, you get an explosive potion which creates waves in water that you can jump on for platforms, then there's other potions that you can use in lava to create platforms, and the explosive ones can also destroy the blocks that Obelix can just punch through. As you'd expect, you'll be punching a lot of Romans, and that works well here. Your main attack does have quite a short range and can be a bit of trouble while you get used to it, but the jump attack here is great with both characters and really what I'd recommend using. There's bosses every few levels as well, and these are good fun to fight, and you need to learn the boss's patterns. You'll fight the same one a couple of times, which is a shame, but overall not an issue. There's even bonus levels where you get to play as Dogmatics. These are always fun to play. The graphics here are excellent with some really nice colours, and the characters and animations are really good. Probably one of the best looking Master System games that I've played, and it has graphics that the NES could only dream of. This was only released in Europe, so it's not one that everyone will have had the chance to play, but I do highly recommend that you do. I'm pretty sure it's not just the nostalgia talking here, this is a really well made platform game, and probably one of the best console Asterix games there is. It's easily better than all of the 16-bit ones I've played. Here is Chuck Rock, another platform game where you play as Chuck, a caveman that needs to go kill dinosaurs so he can rescue his lady friend who's been lady-napped by the diabolical Gary Gritter. 90s puns were great, weren't they? So you go through various prehistoric themed levels including jungles, caves, swamps and forests, battling through a number of dangerous dinosaurs until you can get Ophelia back. That's her name, by the way. As the title of the game suggests, one big mechanic here is chucking rocks. The levels are all quite large and filled with hidden or hard to reach platforms, and the only way to get to them is by finding one of the rocks that's laying around and using it to create a platform or safe path to the area, where you'll likely find items for points, health, or if you're lucky, an extra life. You can also use these rocks to kill enemies, which comes in handy and is often required against bosses, but not always. And the levels are packed with all kinds of crazy looking bad guys. They are mostly dinosaurs or other prehistoric looking things, and the variety is great. New enemies pop up in almost every level, and the game has a real 90s slapstick visual style to it, which I really like. I know some people hate this kind of look, but something about it is really appealing to me. It helps that the animation here is also pretty good on enemies and Chuck. If you haven't got a rock to throw at the bad guys, Chuck can just belly bounce with his beer belly to defeat them. Thankfully, pretty much every enemy only takes one hit, so once you know how far away you have to be, killing stuff is never really an issue. You also have a jump kick, which is surprisingly effective against most regular enemies. As you explore the levels, you'll also need to keep an eye out for other ways to use rocks. There'll often be lava or spikes, and this is where you'll need to throw them to create platforms, or sometimes you might even see a seesaw looking thing, like a crocodile, that you'll have to stand on one end and throw a rock on the other end to catapult yourself into the air. Of course, the bigger the rock, the higher you go. Something that can be a pain is that there are times where you get stuck in the level between some hazards, and if you don't have a rock with you, then you have no other option than to lose a life. To be fair, this isn't something that happens very often, but it does feel annoying when it is happening, though the game isn't actually all that difficult, so you probably won't mind. Extra lives can be hard to come by, but health is readily available most of the time. You'll also find loads of items all over the place. These just give you points, and can really be ignored as points don't give you extra lives or anything. I tend to use them as waypoints to figure out where I've been in the levels, which can actually be quite large and require you to do a fair bit of exploring. The graphics here are a bit of a mixed bag. While I do like the character designs and animations, they can look a little blurry, especially compared to the 16-bit versions. But the biggest omission here are the backgrounds, of which there are none. Instead, you just get a plain black void on every level, which does make them all look and feel fairly similar, as you just get a few platforms. It can even make it tricky to know where you've been at times, with all the platforms just looking the same most of the time. But even with these niggles, I still really enjoy this game, and I absolutely loved it when we first got it for the Master System. I would say that nowadays you're better off playing any of the 16-bit versions, but well, that's not what this video is about. And when I think about the Master System, this is always one of the first games that comes into my mind. Time for a bit of Disney now, with the Lucky Dime Caper starring Donald Duck. You won't be surprised that this is a platform game, like every other game you're going to see on this list, I'm afraid. You play as Donald Duck, and after having a chat with Huey, Dewey and Louie, as well as the very rich Scrooge McDuck, he gives them all a lucky dime to help them get rich. But wouldn't you know it, the evil witch, Magica de Spell, has stolen them all, as well as Scrooge's very own lucky dime that made him get rich. Oh, and she's also kidnapped the kids, because if you're going to be a dick, you've got to go the whole way. Scrooge offers Donald a reward if he rescues the kids and gets all their dimes back, so being the greedy, angry bastard he is, Donald goes to do just that. You're taken through a surprising amount of levels, well, 7. You start by rescuing the kids, who tell you where their dimes are, and then you go get their dimes back, and then it's off to smash Magica in the face. The levels all vary greatly, and you can actually choose which order you do them in, which is cool. But they've got the classic video game tropes of a forest, water, fire, ice, desert, etc. style to them. But they all have their own unique parts, like moving platforms, auto-scrolling bits, swimming sections, maze-like sections, and the variety on offer here is really great. All you need to do is get from left to right, but it's never that easy. There are plenty of enemies here, and all of the levels have their own unique ones, which is always a good thing. Thankfully, Donald is pretty handy and has a few ways to defend himself. You start the game with a massive mallet that you can smash enemies in the face with, most of which die in just one hit. You also have a devastating jump attack with it, which I absolutely love. And if you take a hit, then you will lose the hammer. But it's okay, as you can also just jump on enemies to kill them, unless they're spiky or on fire or something. Killing enemies will get them to drop items, and they'll sometimes drop a hammer icon which gives it back, or actually you might get a frisbee. This isn't as powerful as the hammer, but can be thrown, but only one can be on screen at one time, so if you miss, you could leave yourself open for attack. The frisbee can also be thrown directly upwards though, but again, take a hit when you have the frisbee and you lose it, and the weapons here kind of act like the rings in Sonic. As long as you've got one, you can take a hit, but take a hit when you don't have a weapon and you're dead. Enemies also drop stars. Collecting 3 of these makes your attack a lot faster. Collect 5 of them and you'll be invincible for a short while and you can plough through the level. But once that runs out, you're back to your usual weak state and have to collect the stars from scratch again. The graphics here are, as you've probably noticed, amazing. This is easily one of the best looking games I've played on the Master System, and it could almost get away with being an early 16-bit game. Everything is just so colourful, and Donald has loads of great animation. When you're standing still in the hot levels, he'll be panting and sweaty, or if you're standing still in the cold levels, he'll be shivering. There's just loads of attention to detail that's gone in here, and it really gives the game some personality. It is quite a tough game as well, harder than you'd expect. Coming back to it after all these years, I was able to get to the final level, but there were certain parts of the game where I died multiple times. As you can probably tell, I really am fond of this game, and another certain Disney one, but I would have to say that I think this probably is better than the one that you're all probably expecting to see. And yes, that's right, this is the one that I'm guessing you're expecting to see. It's Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. Mickey's girlfriend Minnie has been kidnapped by the evil witch Mizrabel, who wants to steal Minnie's youth and beauty, which is fair enough. The haggard old cowbag has her holed up in the Castle of Illusion, which is filled with doorways and fantastical worlds, each of which contains a rainbow gem that you need to get in order to open the door to Mizrabel's lair deep in the castle. Mickey will be exploring a bunch of magical levels, including a forest, toy world, sweet world, stationary world, and so on. What's cool is that this is another game where the enemies are unique on each level, and I do always like that. This makes seeing each level really good fun, as you do want to see what you'll be squishing with your ass. In the forests there are evil trees, bugs, mushrooms and plants, and even ghosts. Then you get nutcrackers, toy planes, clowns in the toy levels, worms and evil sugar cubes in the library, and so on. All the enemies suit their worlds, and of course the boss at the end of each world are huge monsters with patterns for you to discover and work out, though none of them are that tricky. I will say that the boss fights here really are a highlight though. Mickey can do a butt drop to kill anything that he wants, and around the levels there's also chests and blocks that you can butt drop to destroy, and you'll get cakes which refill your health and even extra lives. As well as this, you can pick up items, blocks and chests and throw them to either defeat enemies or sometimes to make platforms that you can reach new areas, or even hidden ones. This is a cool mechanic and it actually works into the levels quite well, and it's good fun to use. Also, some of the levels have things like keys in them, and you'll need to get the keys and carry them to the door, kind of like in Mario 2. And you can throw the keys at enemies to defeat them as well, which is nice. And then when you find the door, just chuck a key at it and it opens, just like in real life. You get big boss fights, and these are again fun to do, and working out the best way to kill the bosses can take a few tries, but once you get it down, they can be a bit of a cakewalk. Wait a minute, I already said that earlier, didn't I? Oh well. There's loads of secret chests hidden around the levels as well. To find these, you basically just have to butt drop everywhere, and if you do it in the right spot, a chest will appear. These often contain health or coins that give you points, and eventually an extra life. It's amazing how many of these I remember the locations of from when I had this growing up. Yep, that's right, this is another game that I've owned for more than 20 years, and I'm still not bored of it. Graphically, the game is really good for the Master System. Mickey looks great, and more like his classic design. Everything here is so bright and colourful. Once again, the controls are spot on, being smooth and responsive, and butt bouncing has never been easier. The game is pretty short, and you'll probably be able to beat it fairly easily after a couple of tries, but you will want to come back to it again and again. This is another must-own for the Master System, and I would say easily one of the best for it. Here is Robocop vs the Terminator, a little bit of a change of pace. You play as Robocop, who of course is the good guy, seeing as he wants to uphold the law and the Terminators want to wipe out mankind. There is a slightly convoluted story here that is described in a text crawl at the start of the game, where essentially Skynet is doing its usual thing and Robocop finds out, and while he's on patrol one day comes across a Terminator. Turns out Skynet wants to use the tech that made Robocop to help their efforts, and when Robocop plugs himself into that weird computer thing that he's got, it gives Skynet all the info they need. So Robocop has to travel to the future using the same technology the Terminators do, and uploads himself into the computer and rebuilds himself, and I don't know what the hell's going on. As you can see though, the game plays like a side-scrolling action game, and amazingly, it plays pretty damn well. Robocop has to navigate a ton of levels, including the streets of Detroit, junkyards, chemical plants, as well as the OCP buildings, before being sent to the future where you fight through rebel bases that have been overrun by Terminators, and eventually you end up in Skynet HQ, where you take them down once and for all. You'll be fighting a ton of enemies on the levels. While you're in the past, these are mainly regular human scum who will attack you with various guns, molotovs, and so on. You've got to be on your guard as they'll pop out of windows in what must be a nod to the arcade games, which is a nice touch. The human enemies are all pretty easy though, and only take one hit to kill, and you love killing enemies here as they explode into a bloody pulp that would put Mortal Kombat to shame. I remember seeing this for the first time and thinking it was the coolest thing, and also it does fit with the ultra violence of the original Robocop movies. You also get a few weapons to use. There's your standard pistol, which is pretty effective against most things to be fair, but you will want to collect the laser or rocket weapons that you find in the levels, as these do massive damage and are especially good against bosses. And speaking of bosses, there are some cool fights, but they are kind of easy. I only realised this on the playthrough that most bosses don't actually move. They just stand in one place firing a pattern of bullets for you, and if you get to most bosses with full health you can pretty much just stand still firing at them and you'll win in just a couple of seconds, though this doesn't work for all the bosses. They are still cool though, with a Terminator being a boss early on, as well as Ed 209 and a few other robot bastards. The levels set in the past also have a few things like gun turrets that you'll need to watch out for, as well as fire and chemical hazards in some levels. Thankfully, controlling Robocop is good. You can walk, jump and climb. Pressing up on the jump lets you do a high jump as well, and then you'll need to do this to cover some of the larger hazards as well as collect some items that are just out of reach. Robocop can also cling onto certain pipes to shimmy across. This is used quite a lot in the game, and while it doesn't seem like something Robocop would do, I kinda like it, and he goes super fast. Graphically, the game is really good. Robocop and all the enemies look decent, and Robocop animates very well. The backgrounds aren't bad, but I did find that the further into the game I got, the less detail there seemed to be. However, there is a good variety in past and future locations. When you're in the future, you'll spend your time fighting Terminators and other robot menaces, and these are actually still surprisingly easy to kill, especially if you've got the rocket or laser weapons. Shoot them a few times and they'll fall over, but just keep shooting and you'll get to them again as soon as they stand up to kill them. Often, if you're just walking while constantly shooting, you'll kill most enemies before you even see them come on screen. In fact, that is one of my few criticisms with the game. It is actually pretty damn easy. I hadn't played this for a good few years and managed to complete it on my first playthrough in about 40 minutes. I only died 3 or 4 times, and most of these were because of some dodgy collision detection in the fire pits that kill you instantly. Something that is an issue though is the amount of flicker. Thanks to the large sprites and the amount of stuff on screen at once, it causes a hell of a lot of sprite flicker, meaning that enemy bullets will literally disappear most of the time, so you'll take a lot of damage because you can't actually see their bullets. Thankfully, there are plenty of health kits, lives and even shields you can collect in the levels, so it's kind of evens out. And thankfully, when you do die, you get right back up where you died, so you don't have to do any backtracking. Overall, I still really enjoy this game. It looks great and plays well. It does have some minor flaws, but nothing groundbreaking, and yeah, there is a bit of slowdown, but I would recommend checking this one out, even though the Mega Drive one is the best version. Next up is Alex Kidd in Shinobi World, a game that I actually never owned myself, but my mate Howard had it, and I had loads of fond memories playing it around at his house. Yep, you play as Alex Kidd, who has to rescue his lady partner from an evil kabuki ninja that has taken her. You're given a sword and some ninja powers of your own, and you set off across a handful of levels to get her back. Right off the bat, you can tell this is going to be a fun game, and merging Alex Kidd with Shinobi was a great idea. It really seems like Sega never knew what the hell they wanted to do with Alex Kidd, but having him star in his own series of games where he enters the worlds of other games would have been a really cool thing. Anyway, you have to traverse mainly from left to right in some pretty colourful levels where you'll come across a bunch of ninjas, crooks and the obligatory animal or two that want you dead. Here though, Alex has his sword, so can kill most enemies in just one swipe. You have to be careful though, as even though Alex can take a few hits before dying, quite a few of the enemy patterns can be tricky, and they're often placed in a way that makes it hard to avoid their attacks. You'll find chests in the levels, and these contain power-ups like health, something to make your attack stronger, or sometimes a new weapon, which is like this spear thing that you can throw. I actually prefer the sword, but the spear does have its uses, especially against a lot of the bosses. Alex also has some cool moves to help you get around the levels. Firstly, you can wall jump off of any wall, which comes in very handy in most of the stages and is super easy to use. Secondly, you get an awesome spin fire thing that you can do when holding onto poles and pipes. Just press and hold the 2 button and you'll turn into a spinning fireball of death. When you release the button, you fly through the air, killing anything you touch and even smashing certain blocks, until you hit a wall or the end of the level. This is really fun to use. The worlds all end in a nice boss fight, and these are all fun. They have simple patterns to learn, and they're usually a nod to something, be it a Shinobi game or even a certain plumber from a rival company. These are always a nice touch, and the game doesn't take itself seriously. The graphics here are decent, not as detailed as some of the others we've seen, which is a bit surprising as this was a reasonably late release, but it still looks good with plenty of colours and good animation. The soundtrack is also pretty cool, being an upbeat version of some of the Shinobi tracks. The only real complaint here is the game is very short, and you can actually breeze through it in about 20 minutes. Granted, you probably won't be doing that on your first try, and you will need to learn the mechanics on the enemy boss patterns. However, this is one of those games where you will come back to it regularly, just because it's loads of fun to play. Here is Sonic the Hedgehog. I know, what a surprise, a Sonic game on the Sega list, but this is a good one. Yep, Robotnik is nabbing cute critters as he is wont to do back in the days. So Sonic goes through a bunch of worlds, destroying the robots and kicking his butt at the end of every world. This actually came out after the Mega Drive versions, and surprisingly it's not a port of that game. It's quite different. You are still Sonic and you still jump on stuff, collecting rings and hunting down Chaos Emeralds, but the levels and the way it works is all slightly different. Most levels are familiar takes on the originals, like Green Hill Zone, but there's no loops to go around and the levels are much flatter, not offering the same level of exploration that was seen on the Mega Drive ones. But I kind of prefer this, as it means a game that does focus more on speed. There are noticeably few enemies in the levels as well, meaning most of the danger here are the bottomless pits, spikes and tricky platform sections. You really don't notice the lack of enemies here. The ones that are present though are easy enough to deal with by jumping on them or doing your spin attack by pressing down when you've built up a bit of speed. There's a few levels here that are totally new, like the bridge and jungle levels. These are really fun, with the bridge level being an auto-scroller with some of my favourite Master System music. And the jungle levels see you climb waterfalls and do some precarious platforming on vines. I do like how it all mixes up. Unfortunately, you are then put in the Labyrinth Zone, which is the crappy underwater level, and no one likes these. But with the more simple level design here, they are actually much more manageable and don't have anywhere near the level of bullshittery that the Mega Drive versions do. As I mentioned, you will fight Robotnik for every third stage, and he's actually pretty easy in all of them, with some very simple patterns to look out for. As always, hit him 7 times and he's done. What's interesting is that the Chaos Emeralds now need to be found in the levels, rather than in bonus stages. You do still get bonus levels here, but they're just for extra lives and continues. Instead, you'll need to explore the levels to find the Chaos Emeralds. I've actually never been able to find them all, so don't really know what happens when you do. I know I said that the levels are smaller and you don't really need to explore, and this is true. It's more that the Chaos Emeralds are in places that are hard to reach, or somewhere that you have to take a hit to get to them. When you're first looking for them, you'll even need to jump down every bottomless pit just to see if it is actually a bottomless pit or a trick. Graphics wise, the game looks good, but kind of basic. There are some nice backgrounds and Sonic animates well, but there's a hell of a lot of slowdown here, and even if it's just you and one other enemy on screen, the game will go down to a crawl. But that's a pretty minor complaint in what is otherwise genuinely my favourite Sonic game. Now from the blue blur to a brown one, with Taz-Mania. Based on the awesome cartoon series of the same name, this platform game sees you play as Taz, a Tasmanian devil, who likes to spin and eat. Life of a king there. One day, Taz hears about a legendary albatross egg, which is the biggest egg in the world. Being the hungry bastard he is, Taz sets off across Tasmania to track down the egg so he can make a massive omelette. And I know it sounds like I just made that up, but that is actually the story here. Taz's adventure takes him through a few worlds with a jungle, caves, ruins, volcanoes and valley being places where you think it might be. This does play pretty simply and it's just kind of a standard side scroller, and your goal for each level is just to get to the end of the stage. But yes, there are loads of tricky platforming sections, bottomless pits, bombs and enemies to deal with. Taz only has one attack, and that is his spin. Pressing the 2 button lets you spin for a second or two until your little bar at the top runs out. This will get rid of all enemies in just one spin, but you do have to be careful as spinning also makes you move way faster and can make it easy to fall off of pits or hit spikes. Also, there are chickens in the levels which you will eat to get your health back. If you spin into them, they will be sent flying off the screen. Thankfully, you can do this to the bombs, which if you walk into them, you'll eat them and they'll blow up in your stomach, causing you damage. Though sometimes you are better off taking the hit, as they can be tricky and put on pretty small platforms. Also, if you spin and jump, you can get a fair bit more height and loads more distance. You'll need to use this a fair bit in the levels. Every world ends in a boss, and these are really fun to fight, but going back to play this after about 15 years, I did actually realise how damn easy they are, and I was able to beat them all on my first try. In fact, I beat the whole game in less than 20 minutes, if my footage is anything to go by. But still, the bosses are cool to fight and recognisable characters from the TV show. Some of the level design can be a bit more annoying, thanks to the reliance on blind jumps, which are never fun in games, and in most worlds you'll come across one section that forces you to jump and hope for the best. Sometimes you even have a choice of places to fall down, and some will be certain death and others will be where you need to go, but there's no way to know for sure without just falling down each hole. I guess it is something that you should only get wrong once though. If you do die, there's no checkpoints, and you'll be sent back to the start of the level. Thankfully, bosses are their own stage, so you don't have to replay whole levels before fighting them again. The graphics here are decent and they really match the show, which is cool. The level variety is good and there's a few new enemies on every world. Some are reused, but they never feel out of place. As mentioned, it is a very short game, but on your first few tries you might have a bit of trouble, though I do think that anyone will be able to play through this game in about an hour or so, but I actually quite like it in a game like this. Definitely one I would recommend, obviously. Time to get spooky now with Ghouls and Ghosts from Capcom. This was the first Ghouls and Ghosts game that I played and still the only one I've actually managed to complete. You play as Arthur, a knight who was banging his girlfriend in a graveyard, so the devil decides he wants a piece of that ass and whisks her away, forcing Arthur to chase him down and get her back. If you ask me, Arthur was the problem here. Anyway, you go through some pretty tough levels that are packed with all sorts of monsters, from zombies, pigmen, flying ghosts, and evil plants to demon dogs and vampire men. Arthur can run and jump as well as climb ladders, and has a few weapons that you can use along the way to defend himself. You start with a javelin, which is pretty good at killing things, but in the levels you'll find chests. These are hidden everywhere in the levels and appear seemingly at random at first, but it's actually when you touch a certain part of the level you'll trigger it. So basically you want to jump around like an idiot all over the place hoping one will appear. A lot of the chests will contain these vampire magician men, and they will try and transform you into a duck. If he does, you'll be unable to attack or jump very well, but this does only last a few seconds and normally you'll be alright. Sometimes though, a magic door will appear instead of a magician vampire, and you'll be offered a variety of items. You'll have the option to upgrade either your weapon, armour, boots or helmet. You only get 3 of the 4 options at any one time, but they are all important. Upgrading your weapon does just that. You go from a javelin to a knife, an axe, a torch and a discus, each one getting more powerful along the way, but some do have some strange trajectories, so you might need to be careful with what weapon you choose. Once you've upgraded, you can never go back. The armour lets you take more hits. You start by taking 2 hits, but you get red armour, green armour and gold armour, which each make you have 3, 4 or 5 hits respectively. The helmet unlocks new magic for you to use. There's a few to choose from and they're all available once they've been unlocked. You've got a fire blast, a lightning shot, a shield and more. These all use magic power and are done by holding the attack button for a few seconds and then releasing it. And finally there's the boots, which are actually very important and probably what I'd recommend upgrading first, making you move faster and jump further, but you will be a lot slippier to control. But these are important as some of the jumps, even on the second level, are almost impossible to make without upgrading your boots first. You can actually cheat the system a little bit though. This game gives you a few lives, but you also get unlimited continues. However, no matter how much you die and continue, you will always keep your upgrades, and the chests are random, so you don't know if it'll be an upgrade or an enemy that you get. This means that if you have the patience, you could deliberately die over and over again and collect the chests, which do appear in the same place, over and over again until you're fully powered up even by the end of the first level. The thing is that even if you do this, it doesn't ruin the game or anything. It is still challenging, though probably the easiest version of the game. The levels are all quite long and full of traps. The last level in particular can be a dick, with some ladder sections with things poking out of walls that I couldn't see an actual pattern for, so it was just blind luck if I got to the top. Also, as you may know, this series is famous for forcing you to play through the game twice if you actually want to see the proper ending. Once you kill the boss the first time, you're sent back to the first level and you have to play through the whole game looking for a chest that contains a certain weapon that lets you beat the final boss once and for all. But doing this is a lot of fun, and the gameplay and controls are fantastic and you really won't mind. Now, there is a ton of slowdown in this game, but sometimes that actually helps with all the enemies on screen. It also looks really good with loads of detail, but like Chuck Rock, there are no backgrounds, just a black screen, which is a bit of a shame. Still, this is my favourite version of the game, and yeah, it's probably because I grew up with it, but still, it is awesome. And finally for this video, here is Master of Darkness, a shameless Castlevania clone that is the closest you'll get on the system. Thankfully, it's done well. You play as the stupidly named Dr. Social, and wouldn't you know it, a vampire has turned up, but this time in Victorian England, and he's brought all sorts of minions and monsters with him, including Jack the Ripper and a bunch of waxworks. Yeah, this version of Jack has a real thing for waxworks. As Dr. Social, you go through a bunch of levels, fighting off waves of enemies, climbing stairs and fighting some tricky bosses, but it's hella fun. You get a few weapons. You start with a crappy knife, but you can get a sledgehammer, and this is very slow but powerful, and there's a sword which is a little weaker but has massive range, and an axe which is super powerful but not much range. You also get secondary weapons like a bomb, a gun and a boomerang. These are all used by pressing up and attack, and are generally pretty weak but do have their uses. They also have limited ammo, so you can't go mental with them. All items and weapons are found in white floating masks in the levels. Smash these to find what's in them, but be careful as you might have a decent weapon and accidentally switch yourself to the crappy knife, so make sure you don't just smash the masks and collect everything without checking to see what it is first. The levels here are all quite long and tough, and the enemies put up a bit of a fight, and like a lot of games like this, are often in places that are made hard to get to without taking damage. That's where the secondary weapons tend to come in useful. There's also loads of staircases all over the place that you'll need to go up and down. Thankfully, you can attack and jump while you're on them, so you can take out most enemies without much trouble. There are times where the screen will lock and you'll have to fight a few waves of enemies. Word of warning here, do everything you can not to have a knife, or you're going to have a bad time in these parts. I always try to have either a sword or a hammer, and you can take a few hits thankfully, and the game is quite generous with health potions. You get them inside the mask things, as well as finding them in hidden breakable walls, like Castlevania. The bosses here are pretty tricky, but I would say that they're fair. As always, they have patterns to figure out, and once you do so, and if you have a half decent weapon, you'll be able to smash through most of them. But this is still a pretty long game, even when you know what you're doing. It'll take a good hour or so to get through it. It's got to be done in one sitting though, as there's no saves or passwords. The graphics here are good, with quite a bit of detail everywhere. The enemies and environments look decent, and there is a bit of slowdown, but I was surprised at how little there was compared to other games that didn't have half as much going on as this one. It's pretty impressive. Overall, if you've ever played a Castlevania game, then you'll know what to expect here, and if you're a fan of those games on the NES, then this one is really worth playing. I wouldn't say it is quite as good as any of those, but it does hold its own, and it is a bit of a shame that we never got to see any more of Dr. Social and his stupid name. But yeah, this is a fun game that me and my friend Warren used to play, though I don't think I've actually ever finished it. I definitely have gotten to the last level, but not to the final boss I don't think. I should really add that to my to-do list. So there you go, my 10 favourite Master System games in no particular order. I loved my little black box and somehow managed to have both the Master System 1 and 2. And damn, that's just reminded me about Snail Maze. Should have included that. Oh well. Of course, I want to know your favourites for the system, so let me know in the comments below and I will check them out if I haven't played them. And no, I've never played a Phantasy Star game, sorry. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.